Welcome to the Agent of Wealth podcast with Marc Bautis from Bautis Financial. In this podcast, Marc helps guide you towards financial freedom, ensure you never run out of money, and create a balance in life that prioritizes what is most important to you. Join us for this journey as Marc draws from years of expertise and guest experts to solve the multiple wealth building challenges involved in your financial life.
Welcome back to the Agent of Wealth. This is your host, Marc Bautis. I'm joined by a guest for today's episode, Richard C. Howard, who's a leading authority on U.S. federal government contracts. As a career military acquisitions officer, he oversaw $82 billion in Department of Defense contracts and has advised and trained over 400 companies as a consultant. Richard is the CEO of DoD Contract, which guides, trains, and mentors small business owners and sales executives through the government sales process. Richard is also the host of the DoD Contract Academy Podcast and speaks extensively on the nuance of federal contracting strategy. Richard, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Marc.
I don't think people even think about or realize that there are a lot of government contracts out there. Can you kind of start off by just going over what is this market size we're talking about, some of the benefits of selling to the government as a small business?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, it was one of my biggest frustrations on the government side was the lack of small business participation. So thinking about the U.S. government, they're the single biggest purchaser of goods and services in the world. And a lot of companies immediately think, big defense contractors, right, when we think about government spending. But in reality, the government buys everything that you could think of, from defense and weapon-related spending, but to like Tai Chi instruction and commodities, food, right? If you think about a military base, every military base is really just a small town, or a city in some cases. So, all of the infrastructure that goes into that needs to be paid for, and the government is often buying. In fact, they have a mandate to buy from small businesses. So, whether you're in cybersecurity or accounting, legal, you're selling food, you have a franchise, you have a training business, the government's buying in all of those areas, and it is very rare that I find a niche that the government isn't spending money, even piano lessons, in hiring bands to come in and play. So the spending is vast. The government has to buy from small businesses, yet less than 0.5% of U.S. small businesses are actually participating in the government contracting process, despite the high spending levels.
All right, so now we established that there is a lot of opportunity out there. How does a small business find those opportunities? Is it just like kind of selling and marketing to any other business, or is there a special place to look to try and gain these contracts?
This is probably one of the reasons why there is a lack of participation, is because the process is so much different from, B2B or B2C sales, which I have to do for my business, working with clients. We're talking about the government, and this is one of the benefits, I think, because of all the regulation that exists that govern this to ensure that there's fairness and competition and that the public can see what the government's doing. Everything that they spend money on, with the exception of a couple classified contracting avenues, is going to be public knowledge. So first thing I say before you even think about whether or not you want to sell is just like you said, hey, does the government buy what I sell? So you can go to a website, usaspending.gov. This is a government website, and you can start searching through what the government spends money on. Now, there's a lot of ways to do that, but whatever it is that you sell, it probably falls under something called a North American Industry Classification Code, or a NAICS code. And when you go into USA Spending, you'll have to play around with it. But if you type in, under NAICS, whatever it is you sell, like accounting, it's going to come up and probably suggest some different codes that you would fall under. You can click on that, and you can also sort it by small business spending, right? So you can quickly see, hey, wow, the government spends $2 billion a year on small business contracts for what I sell, or maybe it's a couple $1 million a year, right? And that would be on the really, really, really low end. There may be a niche like documentary filmmaking, but actually they spend more than that. I had a client that was involved with that in the past. But, so you can get a really good idea of how much the government spends year over year just by doing a quick search like that.
Is it location specific? Like you mentioned, each of these bases operates as a small town. Does it help if you're located near, or does it not matter?
It really depends on what you're selling. So, if you're a construction company and you want to keep things in your state, and by the way, certainly extends past the Department of Defense and military bases, right? There's lots of different federal agencies that spend money. But, often there might be something, my clients work in several different states, for instance. So you might be in cybersecurity and doing vulnerability assessments. Part of that work you might be able to do remotely from wherever your business is. And part of it you may have to, go out to, if it was a military base, you may have to travel, once a month to go out there. Or often there are businesses that call them services companies, where they might be staffing a base, in Massachusetts with 10 people that can do program management work, right? But they're usually working in multiple states. So you're hiring people in the different states to go work in those agencies, if that makes sense. So again, very specific. If you're a landscaper, you probably want to keep it local, but really specific to the industry.
And then once you do find out this is what they're spending on and this is maybe something that we can do, what's the next step then? How do you figure out how to get one step further and have the opportunity for that particular contract?
Once you know that the government buys what you sell, if it's local, they buy it in your state, or if not, if you can work anywhere, there's significant enough spending if you're a small business, for small businesses. Now the next step is you want to register your company. And you can do that on a website called sam.gov. It's a government-run website, and that's where most of the solicitations and all of the registering for any business, large or small, is going to happen. So if you go to sam.gov, there's going to be instructions on the screen for what you're going to need to do. So you need to have a legal business in the United States, right? So you're going to need your EIN number. They'll walk you through the process. It takes a couple weeks sometimes, but you'll get what they call a cage code, and you'll get a UEI number. And these are just basically federal identification numbers for your business. And once you have that, you're all set. Now you can technically start bidding on contracts once you're registered in sam.gov. Now, there's a lot more that goes into it than that, of course, but that would be the next step.
And I guess by bidding, you mean writing proposals?
Right.
And what can someone do to separate themselves from the 50 other companies that are trying to do the same thing?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And so this is really where most companies fail at selling to the government, is the initial, when they first discover, oh, wow, the government does buy significantly what I'm selling. They'll discover sam.gov, they'll register, and they'll see something coming through called an RFP, a request for proposal, or a request for quote, and they'll start putting these proposals together. But the government's very regulated in how they buy something. So when you see an RFP, you need to realize that the government, I always say, they have their handcuffs on, because very few people in the government can actually buy something from you, right? So think like less than 1%. It's not going to be the user that's buying. It's probably going to be an acquisition shop. When the RFP or RFQ come out, they need to be very careful that they are not showing any undue preference to any of the companies that are bidding on these contracts. So, for instance, if you saw or I saw RFP come out and the government was looking to buy, maybe it was a $3 million landscaping contract for base X, I can't call them and just get my questions answered. If it's a big contract, not that that's very huge for the government, but the government's probably going to answer any questions publicly. So it might come through sam.gov where, a bunch of companies sent in questions, and then they'll send it out and be like, okay, here are the answers. But at this point, you're not going to be able to set up a meeting. You're not going to be able to develop a relationship. They have to be very careful. But before the RFP comes out, there's something called the market research phase. So, let's say you're a software developer and the government has an effort where they're putting a command and control platform together and you have a great user interface for that. Well, it's during this phase that you have to engage the government if you really want to have a shot at it. Meaning, before that RFP comes out, we want to know who buys what you sell, and we want to find out about the opportunities ahead of time. So if you want to differentiate yourself from the rest of the herd, you want to look for things like, for instance, a request for information or a sources sought. When that comes out, you're pretty squarely in the market research phase, and you can set up a meeting with the government. So what I would recommend is you respond to that request for information. They'll have some questions in there, right? Like, how long have you been in business? Do you have past performance? Yada, yada. Maybe what do you recommend? What do you think of this technological approach that the government wants to take? You can answer or not answer those questions. This part of it's a little bit of an art form compared to the RFP process. And you can suggest things, right? You can suggest, for instance, we didn't talk about it, but when you register your business, there are going to be certifications available for you. So if you're a small business, after you register, you may qualify as a woman-owned small business, and there's an application process for that, or a service-disabled veteran-owned small business. And if you happen to have one of those certifications, and the government, by the way, has a percentage of contracts they're holding for companies like that, you could say, recommend to the government that they set this aside for a woman-owned small business. And if they do that, this is when the RFP finally comes out. It would say, this has been set aside for a WOSB, a woman-owned small business. And now you can put in a solicitation for that as a WOSB. And what you've done is you've eliminated 97% of the companies out there that are going to be, all the big companies now can't apply. And if you're a small business, you have to be a certified woman-owned small business. So you can't just be a woman and own a business. You have to go through the certification process. So now you've made yourself much more competitive, I guess you could say, when you're going after those. Plus, you're helping the government write the solicitation. I mean, that's a key part of this phase.
Is there any way to even take it one step before that? So, you're trying to, I guess, influence a little bit with putting the woman, it has to be a woman small-owned business. But is there ever something where that doesn't have to be initiated by the government? Maybe the government, you think you have some product, some service, you don't even think the government knows that it needs, but is there a way to kind of get on the government's radar, even though they didn't initiate it themselves?
Yeah, so there's a lot of ways to do that. I always say if you had to do one thing to sell to the government, it's just get meetings, build relationships with the people that actually buy what you sell. And there's a lot of ways to do that, but mainly through research and then going out and going through the motions. But if you have something that the government is not actively going out there looking for, in order to sell to the government needs a couple things. They need a requirement and they need funding. When you have those two things, the government can then put companies on contract. If it's an innovative solution of some kind, a technological solution, a product, maybe you have a patent on something, if it's along those lines, what we can do is we can go after something called SBIR, which is the Small Business Innovative Research Program. Now, basically, any government agency that spends a certain amount of money in research and development has got to contribute to this program. So the SBIR program spends about $4 billion a year on innovative research and development contracts with small businesses. So let me give you an example. Let's say that you have developed a virtual reality training system, right? I'm using a real example. And, people can check out our podcast too and listen to some of the interviews with some of these small business owners that have gone through these. You would look for a SBIR topic. Usually topics will come out quarterly. You can go to sbir.gov as the resource for that. And a topic may be very specific, like a recent one was vertical takeoff vehicles, but sometimes they're open, like, hey, if you have any innovative solution, you can submit your topic to us. And usually it's a low lift, like a 5 to 10 page white paper, and there's going to be some other specifications in there. But this is a way to basically propose to the government, because they have funding in the SBIR program. So if the review panel thinks that what you have is innovative, that it would touch on a government need, can win one of these contracts. And the way that works is a phase one SBIR is kind of low dollar, right? So let's say it's that VR training system I was talking about. Well, phase one might just be a feasibility study, right? I might be proposing that I use a VR or augmented reality training system to help maintainers fix aircraft, for instance. Well, that might resonate with them. So that first phase one event is probably going to be somewhere around 150 grand. So small dollar contract for the government. What you're really doing there is A, you're establishing past performance with the government because now you have a contract. And B, they're now going to help you find people in the government that would potentially sponsor you to say, hey, that's a great idea. Now, you can't totally rely on the government SBIR office. Just like anywhere else, like some SBIR offices are great, some people will really help you, but you're really also, you need to go out there. You're getting paid to find that sponsor. And once you find somebody that says, hey, this is a great idea, and they don't have to have money necessarily, they don't have to have much except for signing a memorandum of understanding for you to go to what would be phase two. So you find that sponsor, go to phase two. Now, phase two can be up to 1.3 million. It can be a lot more than that. And that's to develop a prototype or set up a demonstration. It could be a lot of different things that you're recommending, but that's the phase two piece. So this is actually a really great program to get your feet wet. If you have something like that, even if you have a developed product, let's say you have a software tool, if you're modifying it for government use, that could also qualify for something like this.
Going back to finding these opportunities, my father actually had government contracts through some of the larger corporations. So he would create a pellet that went into 50 caliber ammunition, and he would get not the government contract himself, but General Dynamics or Olin would go through him to create this component of it. Are there opportunities out there, or how does someone find those opportunities where, maybe they go to that website, they can see things, but then they look and they say, well, I can't do all this, and or maybe I'm just a small part of this.
Yes, it's a really good point. When we work with clients to help them, and whether I'm working with them or you are going to go off on your own or one of your listeners wants to do this, I always say the first thing you need to do is, we talked about government spending. Does the government buy what you sell? All right. We can learn a lot, and a lot of companies don't do this, but if you're listening, you can learn a lot from some of the free websites or some paid ones you can go to also to do research. But the government has a variety of ways that they can buy things from you, the small business owner or a larger business. They have contract vehicles. They have different things like subcontracting programs on different contracts. There are sole source contracts, right? You need to understand also how the government buys what you're selling. And that's something that you can do pretty easily with some of these research tools once you play around with them for a little while. So to your point, let's say you own a construction company and you do a couple very specific things. And you see contracts that are available, these huge construction projects, they're building office buildings. Maybe you're not ready for that, but you can do, the electrical work, or maybe you can install the HVAC systems. What you're doing there, and I would recommend this is the approach, is finding the opportunity first ahead of time, like we talked about, right? So whether it's an RFI or an acquisitions forecast, or you have a relationship with an office that does this, and you learn, hey, next year, Hanscom Air Force Base is going to be building an office building there, and you want to install the HVAC system. So now you can go and you can look through some of these free websites and see the companies, the bigger companies that do that type of work, right? Just like General Dynamics might be doing something on the technological front, there are construction companies that also do these big projects for the government that are going to have past performance. So you can go and you can find them, and then you can reach out and say, hey, look, I have this upcoming opportunity. I can do part of it. I'm a small business. Maybe you're a woman-owned small business. Maybe you have one of those certifications too. But the fact that you're bringing them an opportunity is kind of sweeten the pot for them to work with you. You're bringing them something, they want to, because you can't know about everything that's happening. Even though you might think that, all these companies have great, systems that are giving them everything. You'd be surprised what they don't know. So that if you reach out to 3 companies like that, you're going to get at least 1 or 2 bites to, maybe form a teaming agreement and go after a larger contract together. And that's very helpful for a small business, because then the big company knows what they're doing. They can handle a lot of the proposal writing, yada, yada.
Artificial intelligence is all the rage right now. Is there any way that you see AI being used to uncover some of these opportunities or help the small business trying to get a foothold in this?
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up. In fact, 2 of my recent episodes on the DoD Contract Academy podcast were with AI, either AI-specific software developers in the government space, or paid-for research tools that companies use to find opportunities that are now using AI to help out with that. One of them is called Govt, and that one is, I mentioned contract vehicles. There's something called GSA. There are large contract vehicles like NASA SOUP. Basically, this is when the government competes a large contract. Like, so as a program, so I was an acquisitions officer for a while in the Air Force, and one of the challenges that the government has is it takes a long time to put a company on contract. It could take 18 months. That's one of the, the drawbacks is the timeline. Now, I might not have 18 months. I need cybersecurity guys to, update my systems. I need it yesterday. So the way the government gets around that is they pre-compete companies and put them on these contract vehicles. So I might spend 18 months putting a huge vehicle together, and I might have 100 companies compete to be on it. We do a competition. I get it down to 15, right? So now I have this maybe IDIQ or a large GWAC, and I have a bunch of companies on there. Now I can just go out to them. I might compete it on the contract vehicle, but I can get someone on contract much, much faster. And you're not going to know about it as a small business owner necessarily, because this information just goes out to those companies, right? Same with GSA. If you're on the GSA schedule and that's how the government buys what you sell, It might just be the GSA schedule holder. So this is a long way of saying that, our software tool like Govt, what they do is they show, like you as a small business owner, you can join that and find out about opportunities that you wouldn't normally see on sam.gov because they're not going to appear there, because there's a lot of primes, big primes that are also on Govt, and they want to subcontract with small businesses, right? So now that I bring up Govt because they're now using AI to not only help match you with what these larger companies have, but they're also using these AI tools to predict, based on what you're selling, when the government is going to have to recompete a contract, right? So that maybe there's a 3-year contract that's going to be coming up here in June. Maybe the government hasn't released anything yet. Well, now they're using AI tools to say, hey, we need to look at these, 4 contracts that should be coming up right around now. And a tool like that can help you find the prime you're going to be partnering with. It can give you a heads up that maybe you should reach out to these offices of the government and see if there's something coming up, and that could give you a leg up as far as, or give you some key intel as far as being a little bit more competitive. So AI is being used that way, and then AI is also being used, and this is really new, and I'm still using it and playing around with it, but there's a tool called Use Rogue. And that is a tool that is it's an AI tool specifically designed to help businesses of all sizes write proposals for government contracts, which writing a proposal is not a joke. The proposal itself is a very specific, like if you mess it up, that could be the difference between you winning the contract and not winning the contract. So a proposal is not a place to be subjective, but this kind of works like ChatGPT, only it's designed to help you write an RFI response, or it's designed to help you write a proposal. So you can, I could type a sentence in there about, if you're a data platform, hey, our technology can ingest structured and unstructured data, and click on that, and then it's going to expand it to give you a couple pages on that. You got to check it. It might not be all perfect, but it's going to help you get to, the finished result.
Let's say I do, write the proposal. I get the contract. It's for a product that I manufacture. And now I got to manufacture the product. Is there any specific government financing for some of these contracts or some of these products? Or is it just like if I was any other business to try and, go the typical, options that a business has for financing?
There's a couple of things I would say about that. First, it depends on the contract. If it's like an SBIR contract where you're developing it for the first time, then you can win the funds. You can win the contract before you have to start developing it. But those are R&D contracts, right? So let's say you win a small services contract. You're going to provide 20 people to do X, Y, and Z at a base or in a government organization. Well, you have to pay those people before the government's going to pay you. There's about a 90-day turnaround time on your invoicing to the government. There are certain financing houses set up specifically for government contractors. One thing to know is once you win that government contract, it's one of the most secure contracts you're going to have. So, a lot of these banks have a lot of trust in the fact that you've won this, and, they can count on the government paying you. And it's also one of the reasons, companies go after government contracts, because it increases the value of your company. Having a 3-year government contract, that's a way that we know we can have continual revenue over the next couple of years.
Does anyone ever come to you and say, I'm interested in government contracts? What type of company should I start to obtain the contracts? Or is it always the vice versa, where I have a company already established and I'm going to go after whatever I can find?
I get a good mixture of both, because often, a company will come to me and say, hey, this is what we do. Let's go win some contracts. And again, we always start with that research drill is critically important here, because the government, I think it's over 300 different parameters for every contract actually gets published. And you have to use a variety of websites to really find everything. And I have a bunch of paid tools that I use personally, but we're looking for a few things. We're looking for how your company is set up, meaning do you have any of those certifications or not? What do you specialize in? And then we look at the spending and we drill it down, like from big to small. So if you're a cybersecurity company, you may have cybersecurity services that you can offer, putting people in seats to do something for the government. You may do vulnerability assessments. And what we'll do is we'll take a look at the 2 or 3 things that are kind of high on your list and see which one of those, where's the spending? Does the government tend to spend more on small business vulnerability assessments or putting people in seats, right? What does the competition look like? Often we can see how many offers on average are coming in for something specific like that. And For services, which tends to be competitive, it might be something like 40 offers are coming in per solicitation. But for vulnerability assessments for women-owned small businesses, we might see that 2 or 3 offers per solicitation are coming in. And that's going to tell us, hey, where should we focus, right? The same applies to almost every industry. There's going to be different niches where we can find where to focus. If you're starting a business, people will often come to me, we'll go through that drill to say, hey, here are some niches where there's a lot of money being spent on small businesses where the competition's low, where you might consider religious services is a good one. I was just talking to our client the other day where, we could see that some of these religious services, where there's still a relatively significant spending for military spending to, put like pastors and music directors in base chapels, for instance. Not a lot of competition there. Might be a place for you to start. But the same applies to just about every industry.
Do you ever see the government actually saying, this is probably something we want to bring in-house, and actually buying a company or buying a stake in a company, or is it just not something that they do?
I haven't seen that. I know historically the government has thought about or walked down the road of trying to own different industries, going back to like World War II and prior to that, hey, should we rely on industry to produce weapons, technology, X, Y, and Z, or should the government own that and drive that? I think history has proven that it's better to have a commercial sector supporting the government there. You're going to get better technology. You're going to get better innovation. The government does develop some things in-house, though, and they will hire companies to help them do that.
In addition to AI, the other thing that we're hearing a lot in the news is about this recession that's coming. At a high level, how are government contracts and government spending when you compare it to the outside industries? The answer is it depends, or is it more stable?
It is going to be more stable. But what I always tell, companies is I think the best approach to any small or large business is to have 2 streams of income coming in, one from your commercial sales and one from your government sector sales, because the government spending can go on a sine wave, and there's a lot of things that can get in the way of you winning government contracts. The government could decide that they're going to switch to a different purchasing method, right? So you could be winning, $5 to $10 million a year in contracts for 3 or 4 years, and then they go to a contract vehicle that you didn't know about, and that might set you back. You might have a year where you have 10% of that funding, right, until you get on the right vehicle. Commercials the same way, like you said. We're in a recession, interest rates are going up, and maybe we're not bringing in the same revenue from that recession. But the government spending, on the other hand, the government, one thing is they're spending money year over year, whether there's a recession or not. We have to feed the troops. We have to keep the buildings open, the infrastructure. So I would say that the government experiences difficulties in different ways than the economy, and they're probably going to be at different times. So typically, if you have a 3-year government contract, you're going to get that funding month over month. Now, there are times when the government shuts down. There's sequestration. There's different things. The government can terminate a contract for convenience, But if the government does terminate a contract for convenience, there's at one point there were 64,000 pages of regulations to do a lot of different things. But one of them is to protect the company selling to the government. So, we had a client that the government canceled her contract. It was a small woman-owned business. She was just doing a moving job at Pensacola. She flew out there, set everything up, flew out there again on the day of and she hired people to, so she had a huge crew to move out a building into another building. And the day of, the whole team's there, and the government terminates for convenience. So she's like, oh crap, I'm out all this money that I've put in my own time. But she wasn't out of it, because we can go back to the government and say, you terminated for convenience, but I still put in all of this effort. I still brought all these people out there. So she ended up getting something like 80% of that contract value, even though they didn't have to do the job. So, even with something like that, there are ways to protect yourself. All in all, it's a very stable and often lucrative revenue stream when you're dealing with the government that can offset something like what we're in now.
Well, we're just about out of time. Richard, thank you for joining me today. You did a great job explaining how businesses can leverage government contracts, as well as how to navigate the government procurement process. What's the best way for our listeners to contact you or learn more about your advisory coaching services?
Yeah, I would go to dodcontract.com. That's our website. You can schedule a consultation with us. We have courses available that you can take as well if you're interested in something like that. And then, for free, you can go check out our podcast, DoD Contract Academy, on, any podcast device, whatever your platform is that you like to listen to that stuff on. And
great. We'll link to all those resources in the show notes. Thanks again, Richard. And thank you, everyone tuned in today's episode. Don't forget to follow the Agent of Wealth on the platform you listen from and leave us a review of the show. We're currently accepting new clients, and if you'd like to schedule a one-on-one consultation with our advisors, please do so at bautisfinancial.com/call.
Thank you for listening to the Agent of Wealth podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered represents the views and opinions of the guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Bautis Financial. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for professional financial planning and investment advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investments and financial planning.